Why should you study GCSE history? There's two quotes here that remind me why I study GCSE history and why I continue to study history. History is who we are and why we are the way we are. History is not just the past, history is the present. George Orwell takes that a little bit further. Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. That's what's exciting about history. History is not just a set of things that happened in the past. History is why we are who we are today, and it's where we're going in the future. So why should you choose GCSE history? People who study history are fearless explorers of the past. They investigate past politics, societies, cultures, languages, health, art, education, money, conflicts, and more. We look at how things have developed over time and we connect the dots to understand how we got where we are today. And that's the thing about history. It isn't just things that happened in the past. And it isn't just, let's look at those events. We do have to look at economics. We do have to look at medicine. We do have to look at art. We do have to look at sociology. It's so many different subjects put into one that it brings us out as really well-rounded people when we study history, because we're looking at all of these different things to understand where we are today and how we got to where we are today. By analysing past events, we learn about the consequences of people's actions. From kings and queens to the London baker who forgot to put his fire out on September the 2nd, which led to the Great Fire of London, which led to the destruction of London, which led to the rebuilding. Some people say led to the end of the plague in London. So we look at what were the actions of these important people, politicians, kings and queens, but we also look at what were the consequences of ordinary people's actions. Looking at the consequences of people's actions is so important in history, as is looking at why people do what they do. That's what the study of history is. Why do we behave as we do as human beings? And what does that lead to? What is the consequence of that? Sometimes that can have amazing positive impacts, but sometimes it can have disastrous impacts. It's really, really good for our own lives to help us make decisions. History tells us about the future. If we apply the knowledge that we learn in history to the present, governments, businesses, individuals, we can learn lessons from past mistakes or successes, and we can make informed choices about our futures. For example, an economist might look at the recent recession that we just lived through, and they might compare it with a past economic crisis like the Wall Street crash. And then they can work with a politician to avoid something like that happening again. History allows us to fix things. It allows us to work on improving our future by not repeating the mistakes of our past and being able to predict things. History gives us a really balanced outlook on the world. In history, we have to study lots of sources, and we learn that often events are the result of complex and multiple factors. It's never just as simple as a person A whacking person B over the head and starting a war. Politics, communication, beliefs, misunderstandings, even the environment shape the way that things turn out. That, again, allows us to look at the world in a balanced and a complex way, to see the myriad of factors that shape things. And most importantly, studying history can be inspiring. It's not all death, destruction, and war. When we discover what people have achieved against the odds and how things can change over time, it gives us the motivation we need to succeed. It can help us, more importantly, you, to make the world a better place. So, the humanities matter. History, geography, and RE. We have some similar skills. In history, a lot of those skills are in demand from employers. History is a really, really well-respected qualification. It is academic and it is looked on really, really well because it's challenging, and it gives you really, really essential skills to take forward in your life, whether that go into further education, such as A-levels and a degree or apprenticeship, or taken into the workplace. So some of the skills that you can get from history that employers really, really want: effective oral and written communication. Can you speak well, convey what you mean? Can you debate? All of these are skills that we use in history. Can you write well? Can you write something really, really convincing? In your future job, you may have to write a letter, or you might have to give a speech that convinces people. These are skills that you can pick up in history. Also, critical thinking and analytical reasoning. Can you examine things critically? Can you analyze them? Can you look at and solve complex problems? And can you make ethical decisions? History is also looking at the ethics. Why did people do what they did? Was that the right thing to do? Looking at all the circumstances. And because when you study history, you're constantly weighing these things up. You're thinking about, why do people behave that way? You think about, would I have behaved that way? And it helps you to decide what is ethically right, what is morally right, which is something that employers really want. So what do we study at GCSE history? We study 2 exam papers. Paper 1 is the international paper. Just so that you know, GCSE history is 100% exam. There is no coursework. So paper 1, the making of America, 1845 to 1890. This course starts in 1840, and we look at America when it's not really very, very well developed. And we look at the mass migration, one of the largest mass migrations of Americans across the continent. And we look at how does that lead to a clash of culture between Native Americans and the white Europeans and the other groups that are moving into America at that time. Then we look at the conflicts and the wars that leads to, the crime, the gunfights, the industry. Studying this really helps us to understand where America is today when you look at where it started. So one of the things we study in the making of America is we look at slavery. We look at the Civil War that comes from trying to end slavery. You can link that very directly to the Black Lives Matter movement that has happened recently. Have we made progress from the Civil War in 1866? If so, why or why not? So looking at where America starts helps us understand where America is today. And America is one of Britain's biggest allies. It's one of our biggest influences. So it helps us to understand where we all are today. We also obviously look at Indigenous people. We look at the Native Americans and how they were treated, what the consequences. It's a genocide. It's an absolute wiping out of these Native Americans. And we can compare that with other societies across the world, Maoris in New Zealand, Aborigines in Australia, and look at what are the consequences of how those groups have been treated. And it helps us understand the world today. The second thing that we study is conflict and tension, 1918 to 1939. This is essentially what caused World War II. We start the course in 1918. World War I has just ended. World War I, the most violent, gruesome and bloody war in history, known as the Great War, the war to end all wars. Yet 20 years later, we're fighting another world war. How do we get from 1918, we never want to do that again, to 1939, we're fighting another horrific war? So we look at the great powers, the USA, France, Britain, Germany, Italy, and we look at how does that all break down? How does it all fail? So we look at ideas like self-determination, so a country's right to run itself, internationalism, how do countries work together, peace settlements, but we also look at some of the main issues that cause conflict, the rise of dictators such as Adolf Hitler. Why did they get into power? How did they get into power? Why do they want another conflict? And also dictators like Benito Mussolini. And this really is one of our most popular units that we study at GCSE. And this is one that often has our students scratching their head and really thinking about, why did they behave the way they behaved? When you know that this could lead to another war, why didn't these people stop this war from taking place? So paper 2 is our British paper. So we look at 2 units in paper 2. The first one is Britain, Health and the People. This is 1,000 years of British history, which sounds daunting. It sounds scary, like, oh my God, 1,000 years of British history, but it isn't at all. We're only looking at one thing in those 1,000 years, and that is we're looking at the treatment of health. So how did doctors treat people? What do they think made people ill? How did the government look after people? And through that, we can understand the society. So we start in the Middle Ages, we start in the medieval era, and we look at the fact that doctors sometimes didn't even meet their patients. They just asked for a sample of their wee to drink to find out what was wrong with them. We look at the Black Death, and then we can compare that with things today, such as the coronavirus outbreak. Or is our understanding any better? Have we dealt with them that much differently? Are they spread in the same way? And the answer is you'll see huge parallels between them. We look at the Renaissance, so that's the same time as Henry VIII and Elizabeth I. And we look at things like, how did surgery change? What was surgery like? How was it gruesome? What the fact that they believed in magic as a cure for illness. We move on to Victorian society and things like disgusting things like the Great Stink, when the River Thames was so filled with sewage that Parliament had to move out. Or the fact that there was a surgeon in the Victorian era that was so deadly that he had a 400% mortality rate in one operation, as in he killed 4 people in one operation by accident. And he was considered the best surgeon of the day. And then we look at, where are we today? How have we made this journey from the Middle Ages to now? Why have things got better? How have things got better? It is gruesome. It is definitely gross at times. There are definitely elements of things that are a little bit scary, but it is really, really interesting and really exciting to see why things have changed, how things have changed. This is definitely pupils that have gone on to go and study certain things in healthcare, and doing things like nursing, health and social care. They've actually come back and said to me, do you know what, studying this was really, really helpful for my future career because I had such a good understanding of where things were coming from. And the final unit we study is Elizabethan England. So we look at the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, and we look right from her childhood up to the day that she died. And you might think, maybe not that interesting, but actually Elizabeth's reign is fascinating. It's full of controversy. It's full of intrigue. It's full of murder, executions, assassinations, affairs, war. It genuinely is a really, really interesting time period, from the fact that obviously Elizabeth is such a strong, powerful queen, how she treats people around her, being in her favor, how she treats her own relatives, executing them a lot of the times. And we also look at things like the fact that Elizabeth basically started the first spy network. We wouldn't have things like MI5 or MI6 if it wasn't for Elizabeth I and her spy masters. So it is a really, really fascinating study of this time period. A lot of the things that Elizabeth started lasted for hundreds of years. Part of this as well, we also have to study a historical site that links to the Elizabethan era. This changes every year, so we get to go and see different sites across the country, and you will know what that question is in your exam, so you'll know you're going to have a question on, let's say, it won't be this, Speak Hall, or it might be a castle somewhere, or it could be a hospital somewhere, and we'll have to go and visit it and do a study of it. Okay, so why study history in terms of the skills that it gives you? History gives you amazing skills. We look at all the available evidence, we come to conclusions. We're like detectives, and that helps you to learn to be organised and manage information. That's something that's going to be really, really useful in whatever you choose to go on to do, especially if you're working with ancient history or certainly older history. We don't have a lot of things to go with, and we have to try and solve the mysteries of the past. It leads us to ask 2 very important questions: why and how? And it helps us sharpen our critical thinking abilities. We will use skills such as analysis, research, essay writing, communication, problem solving, argumentation. There's a lot of arguing in history, and that is a good thing. And you need to learn as well that maybe the history teacher can tell you the facts, but they can't tell you what to think. And history will encourage you to think for yourselves, make your own judgments. And that's something that's good for you as a person, as well as thinking about careers. So if you have a little look as well down the side, we've got our skills here: analysis, research, essay writing, communication, problem solving. Got some potential careers, which I'm going to move on to, related subjects and degrees that you can go on to go and do. And I'll get into that a little bit more. So all these skills are really, really future important for future careers. So history and careers. There are the obvious things that when you think of, and I've had students say to me before, you know, if I study history, can I just work in a museum or can I be a secondary school teacher? Is that it? And yet there are careers that will lead straight into that. History might be in the past, but there's loads of careers in the future that you can pursue today. So why study history? It's great news for your future. You can go on and do things that are very linked to history, such as being an academic researcher, so working in a university and studying history. You can work in historical archives. You can work in a historic building, be a heritage manager. You can be a conservation officer, work with historical objects. You can work in museums. You can be a secondary school teacher. These are some of the things that are directly linked. But there are things that are more indirectly linked, as I said, because history is something that gives you so many skills that it's really, really useful for so many careers. So you could, with history, go on to be a doctor, a solicitor, a politician, a journalist, a police officer, a lawyer, an accountant. Because we use the skills of research, of compiling evidence, of arguing, of reaching judgments, these are all really good careers that can lead into. Nursing as well, anything in the health careers, it's really, really useful for. History is a really versatile and a really, really well-rounded qualification. And on top of that, it's interesting and it's really, really fun. So I hope you think about choosing GCSE history.